My mother told me to know my place in front of 400 people. My brother raised his champagne glass. Nobody in that room knew that the quiet 66-year-old woman they just dismissed was about to dismantle their $15 million empire before sunrise. They found out. But I need to start from the beginning, because you deserve to understand how a woman like me, a woman who has never once in her life caused a scene, ended up causing the biggest one Charleston has seen in 50 years. The night started with the smell of butter, real butter, the kind my father used to order from a small dairy farm outside Beaufort, the kind that costs 4 times what the grocery store brand costs, but makes the difference between a cake people eat and a cake people remember for the rest of their natural lives. That smell hit me the moment I stepped through the front door of our flagship bakery on Main Street, the same door my father had opened for the very first time 50 years ago when he was a young black man in Charleston with nothing but flour, faith, and a recipe that his mother, Hattie Mae, had pressed into his hands before she died. 50 years, half a century. And tonight, 400 people had gathered inside this building to celebrate that milestone, to raise their glasses to the Williams family name, to eat cake baked from recipes that 3 generations of my family had protected like sacred text. I arrived alone. I always arrive alone. I wore a navy blue dress bought on sale at Belk 2 seasons ago, and I carried a small clutch purse that held my reading glasses, my car keys, and a tube of lipstick so old the brand had been discontinued. I did not look like a woman about to change the course of a $15 million empire. I looked like exactly what my family had always told me I was. Background, wallpaper, the quiet one who does the math. The ballroom was stunning. Somebody had spent a great deal of money on white linen tablecloths and fresh magnolias, and a string quartet playing Gershwin near the old brick oven my father had built with his own hands in 1975. There were champagne towers that caught the candlelight and scattered it across the ceiling like stars. There was the enormous portrait of my father hanging above the stage, his kind brown eyes looking down at all of us. And for a moment, I had to stop walking because the grief hit me so hard I thought my knees might buckle right there in front of God and everybody. He had been gone 3 years. 3 years since I held his hand in that hospital room and watched the monitors go flat and felt the entire world shift beneath my feet like an earthquake only I could feel. 3 years since he squeezed my fingers one last time and whispered something I could not hear over the machines. And I have spent every night since wondering what those last words were. I found my place at the back of the room. Not the back table, because there was no table assigned to me. I mean, the back. The standing area near the kitchen door where the waitstaff moved in and out with trays of crab cakes and shrimp and grits. Nobody had thought to save me a seat. 400 guests. The mayor of Charleston sat at table 1. The editor of the Post and Courier was there with a photographer, 3 city council members, the pastor of First Baptist, Reverend Colin Hayes, who had baptized me when I was 11, business owners from King Street and Market Street, Loyal customers who had been buying our buttermilk pound cake every Saturday morning since before some of them had grandchildren. And at the center table, closest to the stage, sat my mother, Constance Williams, 88 years old, back straight as a church pew, wearing a cream-colored saint, John's suit and pearls my father had given her on their 40th anniversary. Next to her sat my brother, Raymond Williams, 58 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Williams Family Bakeries Incorporated. I want to be precise about Raymond, because precision matters in this story. Raymond is 8 years younger than me. When I was 14, waking at 4 a.m. to help our father balance the books before school, Raymond was 6, sleeping in a warm bed with a stuffed bear named Captain. When I was 22, working full-time as the bakery bookkeeper while earning my accounting degree at night school. Raymond was 14, playing football and crashing our father's car into a mailbox on Calhoun Street. When I was 40, managing the financial operations of all 8 locations and the production facility. Raymond was 32, flying to Atlanta every other weekend for reasons he never explained and expensing every trip to the company account. I balanced every book. I caught every error. I negotiated every vendor contract, every lease renewal, every insurance policy, every tax filing for 40 years. I did it from a small desk in the back office with no window, and I did it without my name on a single door. Raymond had the corner office. Raymond had the title. Raymond had our mother's approval, which in the Williams family was worth more than money, more than property, more than air. I noticed Martha Henderson standing near the kitchen entrance, her calloused hands gripping her apron, her eyes glistening under the chandelier light. 71 years old, 50 years at this bakery. She had been here since the very first week my father opened the doors, and she was watching Constance arrange her pearls at the center table with an expression I recognized immediately, because I had worn it my entire life. The expression of a woman who has given everything and been credited with nothing. And then the lights dimmed, and my mother stood up, and the room fell silent. My mother moved toward the stage the way she has always moved through the world, like the room belonged to her and everyone in it was simply borrowing the air. She climbed the 3 steps without assistance, waved away the young man who offered his hand, and positioned herself behind the microphone with the practiced ease of a woman who has been commanding attention since before the Civil Rights Act was signed into law. Constance Williams does not request silence. She receives it. The string quartet stopped. 400 forks went down. 400 pairs of eyes turned to the stage, and my mother smiled, and the room exhaled. She began with my father. She spoke about Samuel Williams as though she had loved him perfectly, as though their 52 years of marriage had been an unbroken hymn of devotion and partnership. She described the early days, the tiny kitchen on Nassau Street where he mixed batter in a donated bowl, the first customers who lined up on a Saturday morning before the paint on the sign was dry. She talked about faith and perseverance and the goodness of God. She made 400 people tear up. And I will admit that even I felt the sting behind my eyes, because she was talking about my father. And no matter what else is true about my mother, she knew how to talk about him in a way that made you believe the fairy tale. Then she talked about Raymond. She called him the natural heir. She called him visionary. She called him the future of everything Samuel had built. She described his leadership as though he had earned it through sweat and sacrifice, rather than through the simple accident of being born male in a house where maleness was the only currency that mattered. She talked about Raymond's bold new direction for the company, his plans to expand, his modern thinking. She used the word capable 4 times. I counted. She did not say my name. Not once in 12 minutes of speaking did my mother acknowledge that I existed. Not as the bookkeeper who had kept this company solvent for 4 decades. Not as the daughter who had driven her to every doctor's appointment for the last 15 years. Not as the woman standing in the back of the room with a glass of lemonade going warm in her hand. I was not surprised. I had stopped being surprised by my mother's ability to erase me somewhere around my 35th birthday, when she threw Raymond a party at the Francis Marion Hotel for being named CEO and did not invite me. I found out from the newspaper, but then something happened that I was not prepared for. Constance paused. She looked out across the room, and her eyes found me. They moved past the mayor, past the city council members, past Reverend Hayes and the photographer, and the loyal customers, and they landed on me, Dorothy Williams, standing alone near the kitchen door with no seat and no name tag, and no place at any table, and she spoke directly to me. "Dorothy," she said, and the microphone carried my name to every corner of the room. 400 heads turned. I felt 400 pairs of eyes touch my skin, like sunlight through a magnifying glass. My mother smiled, the same smile she used when she told the ladies at Bible study that she was praying for someone, which always meant she was about to say something devastating wrapped in scripture. "Dorothy, I know you have worked hard over the years doing the bookkeeping and such," she said, "and your father appreciated your help. We all did. But tonight is about leadership. And I think it is time for you to understand that helping in the background is a blessing, not a promotion. Some of us are called to lead, and some of us are called to support. You have done your part, and now it is time to step aside and let capable hands carry this family forward." She said it with warmth. She said it like she was giving me a gift. She said it like a benediction, like she was releasing me from some burden I should be grateful to put down. And 400 people nodded. Some of them even smiled at me with pity, the kind of smile you give a child who tried very hard but did not make the team. Raymond raised his champagne glass. He did not look at me. He did not need to. Our mother had just done what she had been doing my entire life. Only this time she had done it with a microphone and an audience and the absolute certainty that I would do what I have always done. Accept it, absorb it, go home quietly. I stood there for 7 seconds. I know it was 7 because I counted them the way I count everything, automatically, precisely, the way 40 years of balancing books has trained my brain to measure the world in exact quantities. 7 seconds of 400 people staring at the woman who had just been publicly dismissed by her own mother in the building her father built with his bare hands. I did not cry. I want you to know that I did not cry, and I did not argue, and I did not cause a scene, because Dorothy Williams does not cause scenes. I placed my lemonade glass on the nearest tray. I pressed my clutch purse against my ribs. I looked at my mother one last time, and I saw something in her face that most people would have missed. It was not cruelty. It was certainty. She was absolutely certain that she had just settled the matter permanently. She was wrong. I walked through the front door of the bakery and into the warm Charleston night. The October air smelled like jasmine and salt water and the faintest trace of butter from the kitchen vents. I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel. I placed both hands at 10 and 2, and I drove home in perfect silence, because I knew something that nobody in that room knew. I knew what was inside the tin box sitting on my bookshelf at home. I knew what my father had left me, and I knew that by sunrise, every single person who had just watched me be humiliated would understand exactly who Dorothy Williams is. My brother would find out first. My house is small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that has never been renovated since I bought the place in 1991. It sits 2 blocks from the bakery on a quiet street lined with live oaks that drop Spanish moss onto the sidewalk like gray lace curtains. The porch light was on when I pulled into the driveway, because I always leave the porch light on. Nobody is ever coming to visit, but I leave it on anyway. Because my father once told me that a lit porch means somebody inside is still hoping, and I suppose I have never stopped. I unlocked the front door. I set my clutch purse on the hallway table. I took off my shoes and placed them side by side on the mat the way I have done every single night for 35 years. The house was silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. An old brass ship's clock that my father had found at a flea market on Highway 17 when I was 9 years old. He had polished it with his hands until the brass gleamed, and then he hung it on my kitchen wall the day I moved in and said, "Every good accountant needs a clock that keeps honest time. That clock has never lost a second." I made a cup of tea, chamomile, no sugar. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat every morning for 40 years, reviewing ledgers, receipts, invoices, tax filings, and payroll records for a company that paid me a modest salary and never once put my name on the letterhead. I sat down. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup, and I looked at the bookshelf across the room, at the 3rd shelf from the top, where a dull gray tin box had been sitting undisturbed for 3 years. My father gave me that box on the last day he was fully conscious. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the hospital cafeteria served meatloaf on Tuesdays, and the smell of it had drifted into his room, and he had wrinkled his nose the way he always did when someone cooked something badly in his presence, even dying. Samuel Williams had standards. He pressed the box into my hands with both of his, and his grip was so weak that I had to hold his fingers around the metal just to keep it from falling onto the blanket. He said, "Do not open this until you need it. Dot, you will know when. Promise me." I promised. I put the box on my shelf. I did not open it when he died 2 days later. I did not open it at the funeral when my mother seated me in the 3rd row, behind Raymond and his wife and their daughter Nicole. I did not open it during the reading of the will when the attorney announced that Samuel had left controlling interest of Williams Family Bakeries to Constance, with operational authority transferred to Raymond as CEO, and that Dorothy had been provided for through a separate private arrangement that the attorney would discuss with me at a later date. That later date never came, and I did not push, because I was grieving, and because pushing has never been something the women in my family were permitted to do. But tonight, sitting at my kitchen table with the taste of lemonade still sour on my tongue, and the echo of my mother's voice still ringing in my ears, I knew. I stood up. I walked to the bookshelf. I picked up the tin box and felt its weight. Maybe 2 pounds. Maybe less. I brought it back to the table and set it down next to my tea. The lid was tight. I had to use a butter knife to pry it open. And when it finally gave way with a small pop, I smelled something that made my throat close. Old Spice aftershave, my father's scent, trapped inside this metal container for 3 years, released now into my kitchen like a ghost walking through the front door. Inside the box, I found 3 items. The first was a sealed manila envelope marked with the letterhead of Porter and Associates, attorneys at law. The second was a smaller envelope, also sealed, with the words "original recipes" written in handwriting I did not recognize. The third was a letter, 4 pages long, written in my father's careful, deliberate penmanship on lined yellow legal paper. I opened the letter first. "My dearest Dorothy," it began, "if you are reading this, then something has happened that has finally pushed you to open this box. I am sorry for that. I am sorry that I was not strong enough to fix things while I was alive. I am sorry that I was a coward in my own house. I built an empire out of flour and butter and faith, and I could not build enough courage to stand up to your mother and tell her the truth, which is that you are the one who kept it all alive." I read that paragraph 3 times. I read it until the words blurred and I realized I was crying, not from pain, but from something I had not felt in so long I had almost forgotten its name. Recognition. My father saw me. He had always seen me. The letter continued for 3 more pages. He explained that he had established an irrevocable trust 18 months before his death, working in secret with his attorney, Henry Porter. The trust held certain intellectual property rights, including the original recipe copyrights, and contained a poison pill clause that would activate if anyone attempted to sell, transfer, or materially alter the original recipes without the trustee's written consent. The trustee was me. He wrote about his mother. "Your grandmother Hattie Mae could not read or write." He wrote, "She was born in 1910 in a shotgun house on John's Island with no running water, but she had hands that could turn flour and butter into something that made people weep with joy. Every recipe this company has ever sold began in her kitchen. I put my name on them because the world would not have accepted hers. That is my greatest shame. Dot. Give her back her name. I sat at that kitchen table until the chamomile went cold, and the clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the street light outside my window cast long amber shadows across the yellow legal paper covered in my father's handwriting. I read the letter 2 more times, slowly, the way you read scripture when you need every word to land in the right chamber of your heart. Then I folded it carefully along its original creases, placed it back inside the tin box, and opened the manila envelope from Porter and Associates. Inside were the trust documents, 47 pages of legal language, dense and precise, drafted by an attorney who understood that this paperwork would one day need to survive a fight. I read every page. I understood every clause, because I am an accountant who spent 4 decades reading contracts, and because my father had chosen an attorney who wrote the way my father baked, with no shortcuts and no cheap substitutes. The irrevocable trust was airtight. It held the copyright to every original recipe developed by Hattie Mae Williams and Samuel Williams, a total of 31 recipes, including the buttermilk pound cake, the brown sugar pecan pie, the sweet potato biscuits, and the red velvet cake that had made our bakery famous across the entire state of South Carolina. The trust named me as sole trustee with full authority over licensing, reproduction, and distribution, and buried on page 34, in language so precise it could have been written with a scalpel, was the poison pill clause. If any party attempted to sell, transfer, license, or materially alter any protected recipe without the written consent of the trustee, all intellectual property rights would immediately and irrevocably revert to the trust, and any existing licensing agreements with Williams Family Bakeries Incorporated would be automatically terminated. My father had handed me the keys to the kingdom and hidden them inside a tin box on my bookshelf for 3 years. I closed the trust documents. I opened my laptop. It was 12:47 in the morning, and the house was so quiet I could hear the oak tree outside my window brushing its branches against the gutter. I logged into the bakery's financial management system using the access credentials that my father had set up for me years ago, credentials that Raymond had never thought to revoke, because Raymond had never once in his life considered the possibility that I might be dangerous. The numbers told the story within the first hour. I started with the balance sheet and worked backward through 18 months of general ledger entries. The revenue was still strong, nearly $9 million annually across 8 locations and the production facility. The bakery's name still carried weight in Charleston and beyond, but underneath that healthy top line, the numbers were rotting from the inside like a house with termites in the foundation. Raymond had taken out 3 separate loans totaling $8 million, secured against the bakery properties in the production facility. The first loan funded something called RW Ventures, a limited liability company registered in Delaware. I pulled the public filings. RW Ventures was the parent entity for 2 additional shell companies also registered in Delaware, one called Palmetto Capital Partners and the other called Low Country Holdings Group. 3 Delaware shells in total, layered like nesting dolls, each one designed to obscure the trail between the bakery's money and wherever that money ultimately landed. Palmetto Capital Partners had funded a chain of fusion restaurants in Atlanta that closed within 14 months. Every dollar was gone. Low Country Holdings Group appeared to exist solely to receive wire transfers that were then forwarded to a private account in Raymond's name. The second loan funded renovations to a condominium in Miami Beach that was titled in Raymond's name, a loan, not the company's. The third loan came from a lender I did not recognize, a private capital group based in Las Vegas with no website, no public officers, and a mailing address that traced to a mailbox store on Industrial Road. That third loan made me stop typing. I have balanced books for 40 years, and I know what a legitimate lender looks like. This was not one. I flagged it and moved on. But my hands were no longer steady. Then I found the pension fund. Williams Family Bakeries had maintained an employee retirement fund since 1989, when my father established it as a promise to the people who had stood beside him through every early morning and every late night and every holiday rush. 120 employees contributed to that fund through payroll deductions, and the company matched their contributions dollar for dollar. It was one of my father's proudest achievements. He used to say that a man who does not take care of the people who take care of him does not deserve to have a business. The fund should have held approximately $2.3 million. I pulled the account statements. The balance was $61,000 and change. Raymond had drawn it down over 23 months through a series of transfers to RW Ventures and its subsidiaries, each one just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, each one authorized by his signature alone. I closed the laptop. I pushed my chair back. I stood up and walked to the back porch and pressed both hands flat against the wooden railing and breathed the night air in through my nose and out through my mouth, the way my doctor taught me when my blood pressure started climbing 3 years ago. I thought about Martha Henderson, 71 years old, 50 years standing in that bakery kitchen, her hands deep in dough before the sun came up, her knees aching, her back bent, her fingers cracked from decades of hot water and industrial soap. Martha had been putting money into that retirement fund every single pay period for as long as I could remember. She used to joke with me about it when I processed payroll. She would say, "Miss Dot, that retirement money is my beach house money. I am going to sit on Folly Beach in a lawn chair and eat pound cake and watch the dolphins until the Lord calls me home." Her beach house money was gone. All of it. Every dollar she had saved for 50 years, matched by a company that had promised to protect her, stolen through 3 layers of Delaware shell companies, by a man who spent it on failed restaurants and a condominium he had no right to buy. 120 families, 120 people who trusted the Williams name, and my brother had robbed them while they mixed batter and swept floors and smiled at customers. I was no longer fighting for my father's legacy alone. I was fighting for Martha. I was fighting for every single one of them. The email had arrived at 12:51 in the morning, an automated notification from the company's contract management system. A licensing agreement between Williams Family Bakeries Incorporated and Global Taste Corporation of Cincinnati, Ohio, was pending final signature with a deadline of 72 hours. 72 hours before my brother sold my grandmother's recipes to a corporation that manufactured frozen grocery store cakes. I had screenshot the notification, added it to my evidence file, and spent the next 2 days working without rest, because the clock was now running and every hour mattered. On the morning of the third day, my telephone rang at 7:15. I knew who it was before I picked up, because my mother has called me at 7:15 in the morning for as long as I can remember. She believes that decent people are already dressed and productive by 7, and that calling at 7:15 gives you a generous grace period that you should be grateful for. "Dorothy," she said, "come to the house this afternoon. We need to talk about your behavior at the celebration." My behavior. I had stood quietly in the back of a room where no one had saved me a seat, and then I had walked out the front door without saying a word. In my mother's world, that constituted behavior. I went. I should not have gone. And I knew that even as I was putting on my shoes. But 66 years of obedience is a current that runs deeper than logic. My body was already in the car and driving toward her house on Trad Street before my brain finished explaining all the reasons I should stay home. My mother's house is a 3-story Charleston single on one of the most prestigious streets, south of Broad. My father bought it in 1983, when the bakery turned its first real profit, and my mother has spent every year since then filling it with evidence of the life she believes she deserves. Silver candlesticks from an estate sale in Savannah, a dining table that seats 14, fresh flowers in the foyer every Monday, delivered by the same florist for 26 years, and photographs, 47 photographs arranged across the living room walls in matching gold frames, each one positioned with the precision of a museum curator. I have counted them. I counted them the first time when I was 40 and realized I appeared in only 3. I counted them again when I was 50 and the number had not changed. I counted them again after my father's funeral, when my mother added 2 new frames, both of Raymond accepting a community service award, and the number became 47. And my count remained 3. In the first photograph, I am 11 years old, standing at the far left edge of a family portrait taken at the bakery's 10th anniversary. My face is partially obscured by my father's shoulder. In the second, I am somewhere in my 20s, visible in the background of a Christmas dinner shot, blurred, reaching for a serving dish. In the third, I am standing next to my father outside the production facility on the day it opened, and this is the only photograph in which I am smiling, because this is the only photograph in which someone is looking at me. My mother was waiting in the living room when I arrived. She sat in the wingback chair near the fireplace, the one she calls her chair, positioned so that whoever sits across from her must look up slightly, a detail that I am certain she calculated decades ago. She wore a pale lavender blouse and cream slacks, and the expression she wears when she is about to deliver what she considers spiritual guidance, which is her term for telling you exactly what you have done wrong while invoking the name of the Lord. "Sit down, Dorothy," she said. I sat on the sofa across from her. Between us was a coffee table with a crystal bowl of mints that nobody has ever eaten, and a Bible with a cracked spine that my mother keeps there for visual effect. I folded my hands in my lap. She began the way she always begins, with scripture. She quoted Proverbs about a quarrelsome wife, which had nothing to do with anything, and then Ephesians about the roles God has ordained for men and women within the family structure. She told me that my father, God rest his soul, had intended for Raymond to lead this family and this business, and that my interference was an act of rebellion not only against my brother, but against divine order itself. She called what I had done at the celebration a display of pride. Walking out of my own father's anniversary event, she said, in front of the mayor, in front of Reverend Hayes, in front of 400 people who now think this family cannot hold itself together. Do you understand what you have done to our reputation? I sat still. I listened. I watched her mouth form words that she had been forming my entire life. Words designed not to wound me visibly, but to reshape me from the inside, to make me believe that my smallness was not her choice, but God's plan. This is what my mother does. She does not hit. She does not scream. She quotes scripture and speaks in the voice of love and rearranges reality so thoroughly that you walk out of her house wondering if you invented your own pain. I let her finish. It took 14 minutes. Then I said something I had never said before in my mother's living room. Mama, I said, there are 47 photographs on these walls. I am in 3 of them. In 66 years, you have hung 3 pictures of me in your house, and in every single one, I am standing at the edge, almost out of the frame. She blinked. For 1/2 of 1 second, something moved behind her eyes that might have been recognition or might have been fear. And then it was gone, replaced by the smooth, practiced surface she has worn like armor for 88 years. That is not what we are discussing, she said. I stood up. I picked up my purse, and I walked out of my mother's house for the second time in 3 days, except this time I was not humiliated. I was finished asking permission, and I had 49 hours left before the Global Taste contract deadline, which meant Raymond was running out of time. So was I. I did not make it home before the next blow landed. I was pulling into my driveway, still gripping the steering wheel with both hands, still hearing my mother's voice in my head, like a hymn that will not stop playing, when I saw the patrol car parked in front of my house. It was a Charleston County Sheriff's cruiser, tan and brown, engine running, and leaning against the driver's side door with his arms crossed over his chest was Sheriff Dale Henderson, 55 years old, 240 pounds, a man who had been fishing with my brother every 3rd Saturday for the last 12 years, and who owed Raymond a favor for something involving a drunk driving arrest that had quietly disappeared from the county records 7 years ago. I parked. I turned off the engine. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at this man standing on my property with the particular posture of someone who has been asked to intimidate a 66-year-old woman and is not embarrassed about it. I got out. Evening, "Miss Dorothy," he said, tipping his hat the way Southern men do when they want you to believe that what is about to happen is polite. "I got some paperwork here that I need to deliver to you personally." He held up a manila envelope. "Official business," he said. I took the envelope. Inside was a temporary restraining order issued by a county judge, prohibiting me from entering any Williams Family Bakery's property, from accessing any company financial systems, and from contacting any company employees regarding business matters. The stated grounds were mental and emotional instability, as attested to by a family member. The family member was Raymond. The judge was Harold Kemp, a man who played golf with my brother at the Charleston Country Club every other Wednesday. I read the document twice, standing in my own driveway, while Sheriff Henderson watched me with his thumbs hooked into his belt loops and his jaw working on a piece of chewing gum. "Now, Miss Dorothy," he said, "I know this might seem a little harsh, but your brother is concerned about your well-being. He says you have been under a lot of stress since your daddy passed, and he just wants to make sure you do not do anything you might regret. Best thing you can do is stay home. Get some rest. Let the family handle family business." He said it the way men like him have always said things to women like me. Slow, simple, as though I might not understand the words if he spoke at normal speed, as though a woman who had managed the financial operations of an 8-location bakery chain for 4 decades might need a county sheriff to explain to her what resting looks like. I was about to respond when a car I did not recognize pulled up behind the cruiser. It was a dark blue Lincoln Town car, old but immaculate, the kind of car driven by men who believe that reliability is more important than appearance. The door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, thin, somewhere around 70 years old, wearing a gray suit that fit him like it had been tailored in a decade, when tailoring still mattered. He carried a leather briefcase in his left hand, and he walked toward my driveway with the unhurried confidence of someone who has been inside a courtroom more times than most people have been inside a grocery store. "Miss Williams," he said, extending his right hand to me. "My name is Henry Porter. I was your father's attorney. He asked me to find you when the time came, and I believe the time has come." He turned to Sheriff Henderson. "Sheriff," he said, opening his briefcase and producing a document without looking down, as though he had been carrying it for this exact moment. "I am going to save you considerable professional embarrassment by informing you that the restraining order you just delivered has no legal standing. My client, Miss Dorothy Williams, is the sole trustee of an irrevocable trust established by Samuel Williams prior to his death. This trust grants her full legal authority over certain intellectual properties held by Williams Family Bakeries. Any attempt to restrict her access to company operations constitutes interference with a legally binding fiduciary instrument, and I will file an injunction with the circuit court by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning if this order is not withdrawn before then." He handed the document to Sheriff Henderson, who looked at it the way a dog looks at a calculus textbook. "Furthermore," Henry Porter continued, his voice as calm and level as a carpenter's line, "I have reason to believe that the attestation of mental instability submitted by Raymond Williams to Judge Kemp was made without medical evidence and without any psychiatric evaluation. That is perjury, Sheriff. I trust you understand the implications." Sheriff Henderson looked at the document. He looked at Henry Porter. He looked at me. He folded the restraining order, tucked it under his arm, adjusted his hat, and got back into his cruiser without saying another word. He pulled away from the curb and did not look back. I stood in my driveway next to a man I had never met and felt something I had not felt in 3 years. I felt like my father was still protecting me. "Henry," I said, "how long have you been waiting?" "Since the day Samuel signed the trust," he said. "He told me there would come a night when somebody would push you too far, and that when it happened, you would open the box, and then you would need me." He paused. "He said you were the strongest person he ever knew, and that his only regret was that he never told you while he could still hold your hand." I did not cry. I had done enough crying. But I put my hand on that old man's arm, and I squeezed it once, hard, because sometimes gratitude does not need words. We went inside. I made 2 cups of coffee, black, no sugar, and we sat at my kitchen table with the global taste deadline ticking down below 40 hours and began to plan. Henry Porter left my house at 11:30 that night. We had spent 4 hours at my kitchen table going over every document in the tin box, every page of the irrevocable trust, every spreadsheet I had built during my 2 sleepless nights of financial investigation. Henry listened the way good attorneys listen, which is to say he did not interrupt. He did not reassure me prematurely, and he wrote everything down in a leather-bound notebook with a fountain pen that probably cost more than my kitchen table. When he finally closed the notebook, he looked at me over the top of his reading glasses and said, "Dorothy, your father was right about 2 things. First, that Raymond would destroy this company. Second, that you would be the one to save it." Then he drove away in his Lincoln Town car, and I locked the door behind him, and I stood alone in my kitchen with the brass clock ticking past midnight and the tin box sitting open on the table like a wound that was finally beginning to heal. I should have gone to bed. My body was begging for it. But I sat back down and opened my laptop because the financial investigation was not complete. I had mapped the loans, the shell companies in Delaware, the stolen pension fund, the Miami condominium. But there was one thread I had not yet pulled, and it had been nagging at me since the moment I first saw it in the general ledger. A line item labeled consultant fees, global operations, recurring monthly, $15,000 each payment, running for the last 11 months. That was $165,000 paid to an entity called Global Taste Corporation for consulting services that, as far as I could determine, had never produced a single deliverable, a single report, a single email, or a single meeting on any calendar I could access. I searched for Global Taste Corporation in the Public Business Registry. It was a food manufacturing conglomerate based in Cincinnati, Ohio, specializing in mass production of frozen baked goods for grocery store distribution. Their annual revenue was somewhere north of $2 billion. They made the kind of cakes you find in the freezer aisle, wrapped in plastic, tasting like cardboard and corn syrup, sold for $3.99. The idea of Williams Family Bakeries having any consulting relationship with this company was like a cathedral hiring a parking garage for spiritual guidance. I flagged it. I added it to my spreadsheet. And then my phone buzzed. It was 11:47 at night. The message came from a number I did not have saved, and it said, "Aunt Dorothy, this is Nicole. I found something on my father's desk tonight that I think you need to see. I am scared to talk to anyone else about it. Can I meet you somewhere tomorrow? Please do not tell anyone I contacted you." I stared at that message for a long time. Nicole Williams, 28 years old, my brother's only daughter, a girl I had watched grow up from a distance, the way I had watched everything in this family from a distance. She had been a quiet child with serious eyes and flour on her fingers, always trailing after her grandfather in the bakery kitchen, always asking Samuel to teach her one more recipe, one more technique, one more secret. She was the only grandchild who cared about the baking itself, not the money, not the name, not the status. She cared about the bread. When she was 18, she had told Raymond she wanted to attend culinary school. He laughed. He told her that Williams women did not need to go to school for something they could learn at home. Nicole went anyway. She enrolled at Le Cordon Bleu with scholarship money and a savings account she had built from birthday gifts and summer jobs, and she graduated with honors. She came home to Charleston expecting to work in her family's bakery as a trained pastry chef, and Raymond gave her a desk in the marketing department and told her to manage the social media accounts. I had watched that happen from my windowless back office, and I had said nothing, because saying something in the Williams family only gives Constance another reason to remind you of your place. But I had noticed Nicole's talent, and I had noticed the way Raymond treated his wife, Carolyn, with the same casual cruelty he applied to everything that did not serve his image. Carolyn had been diagnosed with lupus 4 years ago, and while she spent her days managing medications and doctor's appointments, and the slow exhaustion of a body at war with itself, Raymond spent his evenings in places he never named with people he never introduced. Nicole knew. I could see it in her face every time she watched her father leave the house in Cologne that was not meant for her mother. That kind of knowing ages a young woman faster than time. I typed back, "Yes, tomorrow, 10 in the morning, the coffee shop on King Street near the old theater. Come alone." I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about a 28-year-old girl who had just reached across the wall that my mother had built between us and asked me for help. Nicole had grown up in Raymond's house, under Raymond's influence, with Constance's voice in her ear, telling her the same things Constance had told every woman in this family for 6 decades. That obedience is love. That silence is grace. That the men lead and the women follow, and anyone who questions the arrangement is rebelling against God himself. And yet Nicole had sent that message. At 11:47 on a Tuesday night, She had chosen to trust the aunt who had been erased from the family photographs, rather than the father who signed her paychecks. That choice must have cost her something enormous, and I intended to honor it. The coffee shop on King Street was small and old-fashioned, with exposed brick walls and wooden ceiling fans that turned slowly, and a chalkboard menu that still listed prices in handwriting. I arrived 10 minutes early, took a table in the back corner where we could not be seen from the street, and ordered a black coffee. At 3 minutes past 10, Nicole walked through the door. She looked like she had not slept either. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt, and her eyes were red-rimmed in a way that told me she had been crying about more than paperwork. She was carrying a canvas tote bag pressed tight against her chest like a shield. She saw me, and something in her face shifted. Not quite relief, but something close to it. The expression of a person who has been holding a heavy object alone and has finally spotted someone willing to help carry it. She sat down across from me. She wrapped both hands around the cappuccino the waitress brought her, and her fingers were trembling. "Aunt Dorothy," she said, "I do not know where to start." "Start wherever it hurts the most," I said. "That is usually the right place." She took a breath. "My father is cheating on my mother," she said. "Mama is home fighting lupus, and he is out every other weekend lying about where he goes. I found hotel receipts in the same drawer as the contract." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I thought that was the worst thing I would find. Then I read the contract. I let her cry. I did not rush her. I did not tell her it was going to be all right, because I did not know that yet, and because this girl had just told me that her mother was home fighting lupus, while her father chased other women and signed away her grandfather's legacy in the same unlocked desk drawer. Some pain needs to breathe before you can touch it. So I sat across from Nicole Williams in that coffee shop on King Street, and I let the silence hold what words could not. After a while, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a long breath, and opened the canvas tote bag. She pulled out a stack of papers held together with a black binder clip and slid them across the table. The top page was a draft contract between Williams Family Bakeries Incorporated and Global Taste Corporation of Cincinnati, Ohio. The contract outlined the terms of a licensing agreement for the exclusive right to reproduce, manufacture, and distribute all Williams Family Bakeries recipes under the Global Taste brand for nationwide frozen retail distribution. The term was 20 years. The price was $4 million. $4 million for recipes that had built a $15 million empire. $4 million for the work of my grandmother's hands. I set the contract down. I looked at Nicole. She was watching me with the expression of a daughter who has just discovered that the man she called Daddy is not the man she believed him to be. "There is more," she said. She reached into the bag again and pulled out a smaller folder. "Last week I went to the production facility because I wanted to test a new croissant recipe I had been developing. I needed to check our ingredient inventory." She paused. "Aunt Dorothy, the ingredients are wrong." "Tell me," I said. She told me. Nicole Williams is a Le Cordon Bleu trained pastry chef. She can identify butter by smell at 10 feet. She can taste the difference between Madagascar vanilla and synthetic vanilla in the way a sommelier can taste the difference between Burgundy and box wine. And when she walked into the production facility and opened the supply closets, she found margarine where there should have been French butter. She found cacao compound where there should have been Belgian chocolate. She found artificial flavoring where there should have been pure vanilla extract. She found bleached all-purpose flour where there should have been the stone-ground heritage wheat that her grandfather had sourced from a mill in North Carolina for 30 years. Every single signature ingredient had been replaced with a cheaper substitute. The recipes printed on the production cards still said Samuel's Original. But what was being baked and sold to customers under that name bore no resemblance to what Samuel Williams and Hattie Mae Williams had created. "I did a cost analysis," Nicole said, her voice tight. "The ingredient substitutions save approximately 40 cents per unit across the full product line. At current production volume, that is roughly $600,000 a year in reduced costs. That money goes straight to the operating account, which my father controls." She looked down at her hands. Then she said the thing that broke my heart. "I baked a pound cake at the facility using the ingredients they had on hand," she said. "The same pound cake Grandpa Samuel taught me to make when I was 7 years old. The one he said was his mother's recipe. The one he said carried her spirit in every bite." She looked up at me, and her eyes were wet. "It did not taste like anything, Aunt Dorothy. It tasted like nothing, like a cake from a gas station. I stood there in Grandpa's kitchen and I cried because his recipe is gone. They killed it." I reached across the table and took her hand. I held it the way I wished someone had held mine on the night of the celebration, firmly, without pity, without platitudes. "Nicole," I said, "your grandfather's recipe is not gone." She looked at me. I told her about the tin box. I told her about the letter, about the irrevocable trust, about Henry Porter, about the poison pill clause. And then I told her about the second envelope, the one marked Original Recipes in handwriting I had not recognized until I read my father's letter and understood that the handwriting belonged to him, copying down by hand every single recipe his mother had ever created, ingredient by ingredient, measurement by measurement, because Hattie Mae could not read or write and had kept every recipe in her memory and in her hands. "Those recipes are safe," I said. "They have been sitting on my bookshelf for 3 years, inside a tin box that smells like your grandfather's aftershave. Raymond never had them. He had copies, and now he has changed even those beyond recognition. But the originals belong to me, held in trust, protected by law." Nicole squeezed my hand. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the trembling had stopped. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "I need the physical ledgers from your father's office safe," I said. "The one behind the painting of the hunting dogs. I need the original signed contracts with every vendor he has changed in the last 3 years. And I need the internal communications regarding the Global Taste deal, emails, anything with a date and a name." She nodded without hesitation. This 28-year-old girl who had been raised in a house built on lies and silence looked at me across a coffee shop table, and made a choice that would set her against her own father, her own grandmother, and the only family she had ever known. "I will get them tonight," she said. "He has a dinner meeting. The house will be empty." "Nicole," I said, "once you do this, there is no going back. They will not forgive you." She looked at me with her grandfather's eyes. "Aunt Dorothy," she said, "they replaced Grandma Hattie Mae's recipes with margarine and artificial flavoring, and they are selling it under Grandpa's name. There is nothing left to forgive." She came to my house at 9:17 that evening, carrying a cardboard box full of ledgers and a drive full of emails. We worked until 3 a.m, side by side, and for the first time in 66 years, I was not working alone. Nicole left my house at 3:15 in the morning. I walked her to the door, watched her taillights disappear around the corner of Rutledge Avenue, and then I went back to the kitchen table because there was still work to do. The cardboard box she had brought from Raymond's office contained 4 physical ledgers, each one a hard-bound accounting journal with a green cloth cover, the kind my father had used since the 1980s because he never fully trusted computers and believed that ink on paper was the only record that could not be erased by someone pressing a button. I opened the first ledger and began digitizing. I worked methodically, photographing each page with my phone, then entering the key figures into my spreadsheet. It was tedious work, the kind of work that would make most people quit after 30 minutes. But I am an accountant who spent 40 years doing exactly this, and my hands knew the rhythm the way a pianist's hands know scales. I estimated 12 hours to complete all 4 ledgers. I gave myself until the following evening. By 6 a.m, I had finished the first 2 ledgers and confirmed what I already suspected. Raymond's handwritten entries did not match the digital records in the company's financial system. He had been running 2 sets of books, one for the accountants and auditors, clean and presentable, and one for himself, where the real numbers lived. The real numbers told a story of systematic extraction, money pulled from operations, routed through RW Ventures and its 2 subsidiary shells in Delaware, redistributed to personal accounts, gambling debts, and the mysterious Vegas lender whose name still made my skin prickle every time I read it. I was halfway through the 3rd ledger when I turned a page and stopped. The page contained notes in Raymond's handwriting about the Global Taste licensing deal. There were margin calculations, projected revenues, timeline notes, and at the bottom, circled twice in blue ink, was a name and title: Denise Crawford, Senior Vice President of Acquisitions, Global Taste Corporation, primary negotiating contact, personal mobile number written beside it. I put the ledger down. I took off my reading glasses. I placed both hands flat on the kitchen table and pressed hard enough to feel the grain of the wood against my palms, because I needed something solid and real beneath my fingers to keep me from floating away from my own body. Denise Crawford. I had not heard that name in perhaps 4 years, maybe 5, but I would have recognized it after 40. I would have recognized it in the dark, in a crowded room, in a foreign language, because that name had lived inside my heart for 20 years, like a daughter I never gave birth to. Denise walked into the Williams Bakery on Main Street on a Tuesday morning in 2004. She was 25 years old, thin, wearing a blouse that was ironed but fraying at the collar, carrying a resume printed on paper so cheap you could see through it. She asked if we were hiring. I was standing behind the front counter because our cashier had called in sick, and something about this girl made me stop wiping the display case and really look at her. She had sharp eyes, not hungry for food, but hungry for a chance. The kind of hunger I recognized because I had carried it myself for decades without anyone noticing. I hired her that afternoon. She started as a cashier, and within 6 months she was managing the front of house at our King Street location. She was smart in a way that scared some people, the way she could look at a problem and see 3 solutions before most folks had finished understanding the question. She reminded me of myself at that age, if I had been allowed to be visible. I began mentoring her. I taught her how to read a balance sheet, how to negotiate with vendors, how to calculate profit margins in her head, the way my father had taught me. When she told me she wanted to earn her master's degree in business, but could not afford the tuition, I paid for it. I wrote the check myself from my personal savings, not from the company, because Constance would never have approved spending money on a girl who was not family. I told Denise it was a loan. She told me she would pay it back. Neither of us ever mentioned it again. She graduated with honors. She called me from the stage after the ceremony, crying, saying, "Miss Dot, I did it. I could not have done it without you. You are the only person who ever believed in me." I kept that voicemail saved on my phone for years, until the phone broke and the message was lost. But I can still hear her voice in my memory. Every word, every crack, every breath. Denise left Charleston 3 years after finishing her degree. She took a position with a food distribution company in Charlotte, and then a larger company in Chicago. And we lost touch, the way people do when life moves fast and distance grows wide. I thought about her often. I wondered if she was using the things I taught her. I hoped she was. I told my father about her once, sitting in this very kitchen, and I said, "Daddy, I think I finally understand why you spent so much time teaching me. Because passing it on is the only thing that makes all the invisible years worth it." He had smiled at that, one of the last real smiles I saw on his face before the hospital took them all away. And now Denise Crawford's name was circled in blue ink at the bottom of my brother's secret ledger, attached to a $4 million deal to sell my grandmother's recipes to a corporation that manufactured frozen grocery store cakes. The woman I had poured 20 years of wisdom and savings and love into was the one negotiating the destruction of everything I had taught her to respect. I sat at my kitchen table in the gray light of early morning and felt something I had not felt since the night of the celebration. Not anger, not determination, something worse, something that sat deeper in the chest and spread slower and hurt in places that spreadsheets and legal documents could not reach. Betrayal, real betrayal, the kind that comes only from love, because strangers cannot betray you. Only the people you trusted with the softest parts of yourself can reach in deep enough to do that kind of damage. I closed the ledger. I finished my cold coffee, and I picked up my phone because I needed to look this woman in the eye. I called the number written in Raymond's ledger at 8 o'clock that morning. Denise answered on the second ring. Her voice was different from how I remembered it, smoother, flatter, the way a river sounds after it has been paved over and turned into a canal. I said, "Denise, this is Dorothy Williams." There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathing change. Then she said, "Miss Dot, I was wondering when you would call." That sentence told me everything. She was not surprised. She knew I would find out. She had been waiting, which meant she had already decided what she would say. And that meant this conversation would not end the way I had spent the last 2 hours, hoping it might. I asked her to meet me. She agreed without hesitation. She suggested a restaurant downtown, something upscale, the kind of place where people conduct business over wine lists. I said no. I said the coffee shop on King Street at noon, the same table where Nicole and I had sat the day before. I wanted her on my ground, in a place that smelled like Charleston, in a place where our history still lived in the walls. She was already seated when I arrived. She looked prosperous. That is the word that came to mind. Not wealthy, not flashy, but prosperous in the careful, deliberate way of a woman who has studied exactly how success is supposed to look and has replicated it precisely. Tailored navy blazer, small gold earrings, hair straightened and pinned in a style that said corporate boardroom. She stood when she saw me and smiled, and the smile was perfect, and it meant nothing. "Miss Dot," she said, "you look wonderful." "Sit down, Denise," I said. We sat. She ordered a sparkling water with lemon. I ordered nothing because my stomach had been clenched since 6 in the morning, and I did not trust it to hold anything down. I placed the Global Taste contract on the table between us. I placed Raymond's ledger page beside it, the one with her name circled in blue ink. I placed the ingredient analysis that Nicole had compiled, showing every substitution, every degraded recipe, every penny saved by replacing my grandmother's sacred ingredients with chemicals and cheap imitations. Then I folded my hands and waited. Denise looked at the document. She did not touch them. She looked at me. "You taught me to be thorough," she said. "I see you still are." "I taught you a lot of things," I said. "I am trying to figure out which ones you actually kept." Something shifted in her face then. A small tightening around the jaw. A flicker of something that might have been shame in a person still capable of feeling it. But it passed quickly, replaced by the smooth professional mask that I imagined she wore in conference rooms and negotiation tables across the country. "Miss Dot," she said, "I have enormous respect for you and for what your family built. But this is business. Global Taste is offering $4 million for recipes that your brother cannot even produce correctly anymore. The brand is deteriorating. The quality is already gone. In 5 years, Williams Family Bakeries will be bankrupt, and those recipes will be worth nothing. I am offering Raymond a way out, and I am offering those recipes a future, even if that future is in a freezer aisle." I let her finish. I let every word land on the table between us like stones dropped into still water. Then I said, "Denise, I paid for your MBA with my personal savings. I wrote that check on a Tuesday afternoon in this very neighborhood, and I did it because I believed you were worth investing in, not because I expected anything back, but because I thought you understood what it meant when someone gives you something precious and trusts you to carry it with integrity. She looked away. First time she had broken eye contact since I sat down. Those recipes are not Raymond's to sell. I said, they never were. And you knew that, because I taught you how to read a corporate structure. And you are smart enough to have looked into the ownership before you flew down here to make your offer. Miss Dot, she said quietly, business is business. I stood up. I picked up the documents. I looked at this woman I had loved like a daughter, this woman I had bragged about to my father, this woman whose graduation voicemail I had kept saved on my phone until the phone itself died. And I said, you are right. Denise, business is business, and you are about to find out exactly how I do business. I drove home. I parked in my driveway. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for 11 minutes because I could not make my legs work. The anger I had carried since the night of the celebration had been fuel, clean and hot, pushing me forward through the spreadsheets and the ledgers and the legal documents and the confrontation with my mother. But this was not anger. This was grief. This was the specific, devastating grief of discovering that a person you poured yourself into has used everything you gave them to help destroy everything you love. I went inside. The house was dark. The brass clock ticked. I walked past the kitchen table covered in documents and legal pads and went straight to the back porch. I lowered myself onto my knees on the wooden boards. I folded my hands, and I prayed. I did not pray for victory. I did not pray for revenge. I prayed for strength, because for the first time since I opened that tin box, I was not sure I had enough left. I knelt there for 20 minutes. The Charleston night wrapped around me like a warm cloth. I listened to the crickets and the distant sound of a ship's horn from the harbor and the oak tree brushing against my gutter. And somewhere in those 20 minutes, between one breath and the next, the strength came back, not like fire, like roots, like something that had always been there, deep underground, waiting for the rain. I stood up. I wiped my knees. I went inside and called Henry Porter. The plan does not change, I said, but there is one more name on the list now. I heard about the press conference the same evening I came home from meeting Denise. I was driving down Meeting Street with both windows down, letting the salt air push through the car because my lungs felt tight and my chest felt heavy, and I needed something clean to breathe. The radio was on, tuned to the local news station the way it always is because I am a woman of habit, and the anchor set it between a weather update and a high school football score, as though it were nothing. Raymond Williams, Chief Executive Officer of Williams Family Bakeries, has announced a special press event tomorrow morning at the company's flagship location on Main Street to unveil what he is calling a bold new chapter for the beloved Charleston institution. Details at 11. I pulled over. I sat on the shoulder of the road with the engine idling and the radio still talking, and I smiled for the first time in 8 days. not a warm smile, not a happy smile. The kind of smile a chess player allows herself when her opponent moves exactly the piece she needed him to move. Raymond was going to stand on a stage in our father's bakery and announce the global taste deal to the press, to the investors, to the public. He was going to do it with cameras rolling and microphones live, and Constance sitting in the front row, nodding like a queen approving a royal decree. He was going to hand me the perfect stage. I drove home and called Henry Porter. I told him about the press conference. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dorothy, are you sure you want to do this publicly? We can file the injunction quietly. We can handle this through the courts." "Henry," I said, "my mother humiliated me in front of 400 people. My brother stole the retirement money of 120 employees. They replaced my grandmother's recipes with margarine. They tried to have me declared mentally unstable and barred from my own family's business. If I do this quietly, nothing changes. Quiet is what they have been counting on from me my entire life." He was silent for 5 seconds. Then he said, "I will have the documentation ready by 7 in the morning. What color folders do you want?" "Red," I said. "I want them to see the folders coming." I made 2 more calls that night. The first was to Nicole. I told her the plan. She said she would be at my house by 6:45. The second call was harder. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and pressed Martha Henderson's name. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Martha," I said, "it is Dorothy. I am sorry to wake you, but there is something you need to know, and I did not want you to hear it from anyone else." I told her about the pension fund. I told her gently, the way you tell a person that something precious has been taken from them, with no softening and no delay, but with enough warmth that they know the person delivering the news cares about the wound it will leave. I told her the exact numbers. $2.3 million reduced to $61,000. 23 months of transfers, each one signed by Raymond. The line went quiet for a long time. I could hear Martha breathing. I could hear a television playing softly in another room of her house. Then she said, "Miss Dot, I have been putting money into that fund since 1989. I said, "I know." "Martha," she said, "that was my beach house money." I said, "I know." Then I told her about the press conference. I told her Raymond was going to announce a deal to sell our family's recipes to a frozen food manufacturer. I told her I was going to be there with evidence of everything he had done. And I told her she did not have to come, that this was not her fight, that she had given enough to this family for 50 years, and nobody would blame her for staying home. Martha Henderson was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Miss Dot, I have been quiet for 50 years because I needed that job. I do not need it anymore. What time does it start?" 10 o'clock, I said. "I will be there at 9:30. She said, "Front row if I can get it." That night I did something I had not done in years. I opened my bedroom closet and reached past the cotton blouses and the sensible slacks and the Sunday church dresses to the far back corner, where a garment bag hung alone, zipped shut, untouched. I unzipped it and took out a charcoal gray suit, single-breasted, 2 buttons, notched lapel. I had bought it 35 years ago for my master's thesis defense at the College of Charleston. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, purchased with 3 weeks of savings from my bakery salary, and I had worn it exactly once, on the day I stood in front of a panel of professors and defended my research on forensic accounting methodology and family-held enterprises, and received the highest marks in my graduating class. Nobody in my family had attended the defense. My mother said she had a hair appointment. Raymond did not know it was happening. My father wanted to come, but Constance told him it was unnecessary. I hung the suit on the back of the bedroom door. I pressed it with a steam iron. I polished my low-heeled black pumps. I laid everything out on the bed the way a soldier lays out a uniform the night before deployment. Then I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at myself in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me was 66 years old, silver hair cut short, hands strong and spotted with age, eyes tired but clear, the kind of clear that comes not from rest but from certainty. She did not look like a woman the world had treated gently. She looked like a woman the world had underestimated so consistently and for so long that the world had forgotten she was capable of anything at all. "You are not invisible," I said to her. "You have never been invisible. You have been patient." Henry Porter arrived at 6:45 the next morning with a leather satchel full of certified documents. Nicole arrived at 6:50 with her evidence drive. We assembled 30 red folders at my kitchen table, one for every person we expected at that press conference. Each folder contained the loan documents totaling $8 million, the pension fund statements, the ingredient analysis, the global taste contract, and a single sentence on the first page that read, "Everything in this folder is supported by original documentation currently held in secure custody by Porter and Associates, attorneys at law." I put on my charcoal gray suit. I buttoned both buttons. My father's voice came to me from the letter. "You are the one who kept it all alive." I picked up the box of red folders and walked out my front door. The bakery on Main Street had been transformed. Somebody had set up a small stage near the front window where the buttermilk pound cake display usually sat. There were folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a podium with a microphone, and a banner hanging behind the stage that read, "Williams Family Bakeries, a bold new chapter." A photographer from the Post and Courier was adjusting his lens near the counter. A television crew from the local news affiliate was running cables across the floor. Raymond had even hired a caterer, which struck me as the kind of irony only a man with no self-awareness could produce. Hiring an outside caterer for a press conference inside a bakery. I counted 32 people in the audience, investors, bankers, local business leaders, 2 city council members, and a cluster of loyal customers who had received personal invitations. Constance sat in the front row center, wearing a white St. John jacket, pearls, and the serene expression of a woman who believes the universe is about to confirm everything she has ever wanted. Raymond stood near the podium in a navy suit that I happen to know cost $3,200 because I had seen the receipt in the company expense account, and seated 3 rows behind Constance in a charcoal blazer with her legs crossed and a leather portfolio on her lap was Denise Crawford. I entered through the back door, the same kitchen door where I had stood with my lemonade on the night of the celebration, the same door the waitstaff had used to carry trays past me as though I were a coat rack. I carried the box of red folders against my hip and walked through the kitchen where my father had built his first oven, past the prep station where Martha Henderson had kneaded dough for 50 years, and into the main room. Nobody noticed me at first. Raymond was at the podium testing the microphone. Constance was greeting a banker's wife. The photographer was checking his flash. I set the box down on the counter near the register, the same register where my father had made his first sale, and I waited. Raymond began speaking at 10:03. He talked about legacy. He talked about innovation. He talked about honoring our father's vision while embracing the future. He used the word synergy twice, which told me someone else had written his speech, because Raymond does not know what synergy means. Then he introduced the bold new chapter, a strategic partnership with Global Taste Corporation to bring Williams family recipes to every home in America through nationwide retail distribution. The room applauded politely. Constance beamed. Denise uncrossed her legs and opened her portfolio, ready to present. That is when I stepped forward. I walked to the center aisle between the folding chairs carrying a stack of red folders. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. I simply began placing one red folder on each lap, moving down the rows the way I used to distribute financial reports at quarterly board meetings, which I had done for this company for 37 years before Raymond stopped inviting me. Raymond saw me. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Constance turned in her chair. Her face went from serene to rigid in the space of one heartbeat. "Dorothy," Raymond said into the microphone, "what are you doing? This is a private event." I looked at him. I said, "It is a press conference. Raymond, the press is here. So am I." Then I turned to the room. "My name is Dorothy Williams," I said, and my voice carried without the microphone because 40 years of silence teaches you how to fill a room when you finally decide to speak. I am the daughter of Samuel Williams, who built this bakery. I was the chief financial officer of this company in everything but title for 4 decades. And the partnership my brother just announced will destroy everything my father and my grandmother created. I told them to open the red folders. I walked them through each page. The $8 million in loans secured against properties Raymond did not have the authority to mortgage alone. The Delaware Shell Company. The Atlanta restaurants that consumed every borrowed dollar and produced nothing. The Miami Beach condominium purchased with company funds. And then I told them about the pension fund. I told them that 120 employees had contributed their earnings for decades, matched dollar for dollar, by a company that had promised to protect them, and that Raymond had drained $2.3 million down to $61,000 through transfers designed to stay just below the reporting threshold. A woman in the 4th row gasped. A banker in the 2nd row closed his folder, removed his reading glasses, and stared at Raymond with the expression of a man calculating exactly how much legal exposure he had just inherited. The television camera was rolling. Raymond began to shout. He called me delusional. He called me bitter. Constance rose from her chair and turned to face the room with both hands, raised like a preacher calming a congregation. She said, "My daughter has been under tremendous emotional strain since her father's passing. She is not well. Please do not let this unfortunate display overshadow the wonderful future that Raymond has planned." And then a voice came from the back of the room, a voice that was old and rough and shaking, but louder than anything else in that bakery. "That is enough, Constance." Martha Henderson stood up from a folding chair near the kitchen door. 71 years old, 50 years of service, hands still dusted with flour from the morning shift. She was trembling, but she was standing, and every person in that room turned to look at her. "I have worked in this bakery since the week Samuel Williams opened the doors," Martha said. "I watched Dorothy balance every book, fix every mistake, save this company from going under more times than any of you know. I watched her do it from a desk, with no window, while her brother flew to Atlanta on the company's money. And I just learned that the retirement fund I've been paying into for 50 years is gone." Her voice cracked. "So do not stand there and tell me that woman is not well. She is the only well person in this building." The room went silent. Constance opened her mouth. No words came out. For the first time in 88 years, the matriarch of the Williams family had nothing to say. What happened next moved fast. Raymond grabbed the microphone and said the press conference was over. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said his legal team would release a statement by the end of the day. His voice was high and tight, the voice of a man who can feel the floor tilting beneath his feet, but has not yet accepted that he is already falling. The banker from the 2nd row stood up, tucked the red folder under his arm, and walked out without shaking anyone's hand. The city council members followed. The television reporter spoke quietly into her phone, and I could see from the way her eyes moved that she was already pitching the story to her producer. The photographer from the Post and Courier took 6 more pictures before anyone thought to ask him to stop. Denise Crawford sat perfectly still in the 3rd row. She did not look at me. She did not look at Raymond. She closed her leather portfolio, placed it in her bag, and left through the side door like smoke passing through a crack in the wall. I watched her go, and I felt nothing. The grief I had carried since seeing her name in that ledger had burned itself down to ash on my back porch the night before, and what was left was not anger or sadness, but the flat, clean surface of a decision already made. Constance was the last to move. She sat in her front row chair with her hands folded in her lap, and her chin raised, and her eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the stage, as though she could hold the room together through sheer force of posture. I had seen her do this before, at family dinners when an argument got too loud, at church when a sermon hit too close to home. She would go still, go regal, become a statue of a woman who is above whatever chaos surrounds her. It had worked for 88 years. It was not working now. The room emptied within minutes. Investors clutching red folders, journalists murmuring into phones, loyal customers walking out in silence, some of them wiping their eyes, unable to look at the portrait of my father hanging above the stage. Martha Henderson remained in her chair near the front, hands flat on her knees, staring straight ahead with the calm exhaustion of a woman who has just done the bravest thing of her life and is still processing what it cost her. I walked over to her and placed my hand on her shoulder. She reached up and covered my hand with hers. Neither of us said a word. Then Raymond moved. He crossed the empty room in 5 long strides, grabbed Constance by the elbow, and pulled her toward the back of the bakery. His face had gone from pale to red, the color of a man whose panic has curdled into something desperate. He was muttering as he walked, half words and broken sentences. Something about the basement and the files and getting there before anyone else did. Constance went with him. She did not resist. She did not question. She simply rose from her chair and followed her son through the kitchen, past the prep station, past the old brick oven, and down the narrow staircase to the basement storage room, where my father had kept the company's physical archives since 1975. I knew what Raymond was going to do before he did it. I knew because I had spent 40 years inside this man's financial patterns, and the one constant in Raymond's behavior was that when a problem could not be charmed away or blamed on someone else, he destroyed the evidence. I had watched him shred vendor complaints. I had watched him delete emails the night before audits. I had watched him reformat an entire computer hard drive rather than let a bank examiner see what was on it. Destruction was not Raymond's last resort. It was his first instinct. I did not follow them downstairs. Instead, I walked to the front of the bakery, stepped outside onto Main Street, and called 911 from my cell phone. I told the dispatcher that I had reason to believe someone was about to start a fire in the basement of a commercial building on Main Street. The dispatcher asked me how I knew. I said, because I know the man who is down there, and fire is what he does when he runs out of lies. Then I called Henry Porter. Then I called Nicole. Then I stood on the sidewalk in my charcoal gray suit with my arms at my sides and watched the front of the building that my father had poured his life into for half a century. The smoke appeared 11 minutes later. It came first from the basement window on the east side, a thin gray curl that could have been mistaken for steam if you did not know what you were looking at. Then it thickened. Then it darkened. Then the window cracked from the heat, and the smoke poured out in a black column that rose above Main Street like a terrible flag. The fire trucks arrived 4 minutes after that, 2 engines and a ladder truck, sirens splitting the morning air, firefighters in full gear running hoses through the bakery's front door. They had the fire contained within 20 minutes, but by then, the basement archive was gutted. 50 years of physical records turned to wet black ash in the room where my father had once shown me how to organize files when I was 12 years old. Raymond and Constance emerged from the side entrance before the firefighters went in. Raymond's shirt was untucked and his hands were black with soot. Constance walked beside him with her chin still raised and her pearls still in place. I heard her say something to him that chilled me more than the smoke. It was a cleansing, she said. The Lord removes what no longer serves his purpose. She had helped him. She had stood in that basement while her son poured accelerant on her dead husband's life work, and she had called it holy. I stood across the street and watched them lie to the arriving officers about faulty electrical wiring. I did not intervene. I did not need to. Because everything Raymond had just burned already existed in digital form on my laptop, on Nicole's evidence drive, and in certified copies held in Henry Porter's office safe. He burned the shadows. I kept the substance. Raymond went on television that evening. The 6 o'clock news. He sat beside Constance on a beige sofa in what appeared to be a media room at the Charleston Country Club. Both of them dressed in fresh clothes. Both of them composed. Both of them lying with the practiced fluency of people who have been lying together for decades. Raymond looked directly into the camera and said that his sister Dorothy had been suffering from severe emotional disturbance since their father's death. He said she had fabricated financial documents to support a delusional claim of ownership over the family business. He said the fire in the basement was an electrical accident currently under investigation, and that he was cooperating fully with authorities. Constance placed her hand on Raymond's arm and said, "Our family is asking for privacy during this difficult time. Dorothy needs help. We love her, and we pray for her healing every day." She said it with tears in her eyes, real tears, or something close enough that the camera could not tell the difference. 88 years of practice will do that to a woman. I watched the broadcast from my kitchen table, sitting between 2 laptops and 4 legal pads, and the tin box that still smelled like my father's aftershave. I watched my mother cry on television for a daughter she had never once cried for in private. I watched my brother describe me as mentally ill to a city that had known my father, that had bought his pound cake every Saturday morning, that had trusted the Williams name for half a century. Then I turned off the television and called Henry Porter. "They are going to come for me," I said. "The police. Raymond has friends in the department. Sheriff Henderson already tried once. They will use the fire and the press conference to build a case that I am the problem." Henry said, "Let them come. Bring everything." The call came at 7:45 the next morning. A detective from the Charleston Police Department named James Moreau asked me to come to the station voluntarily to answer questions regarding the incident at Williams Family Bakeries. His voice was polite and careful, the voice of a man who has been told one story, but suspects there might be another. I said yes. I said I would be there at 9 o'clock. Then I spent the next 75 minutes organizing every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past 8 days into a single comprehensive file: the digitized ledgers, the bank records, the pension fund statements, the global taste contract, the ingredient analysis, the corporate filings for RW Ventures and its 2 Delaware subsidiaries, Palmetto Capital Partners, and Low Country Holdings Group, the public records for the Las Vegas lender, Nicole's photographs of the substituted ingredients, and the certified copies of the irrevocable trust, stamped and notarized by Henry Porter's office, proving my legal authority over the intellectual property that formed the foundation of the entire Williams empire. Henry drove me to the station in his Lincoln Town car. We did not speak during the ride. There was nothing left to say that the documents would not say better. Detective Moreau was waiting in an interview room on the second floor. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with careful eyes and a notebook open on the table. Across from him sat his partner, a woman named Detective Arlene Voss, who looked like she had been doing this job long enough to know when someone was wasting her time. Between them was a thin folder containing whatever Raymond had given them. "Miss Williams," Detective Moreau said, "thank you for coming in. We would like to ask you some questions about the events at the bakery yesterday, the press conference, and the fire." I set my file on the table. It was 3 inches thick. "I would like to give you some answers," I said. "I walked them through everything. I started with the financial structure, explaining each loan, each transfer, each shell company in language precise enough for a courtroom, but clear enough for anyone to follow. I showed them how Raymond had used the 3 Delaware limited liability companies to funnel company money into failed personal ventures. I showed them the Miami condominium purchased with bakery funds. I showed them the pension fund drawdown, transaction by transaction, each one calculated to stay below the $10,000 reporting threshold that triggers automatic federal review. Detective Voss stopped me there. She leaned forward. "Say that again," she said. He structured the withdrawals to avoid the reporting threshold. "Yes," I said, 23 separate transfers over 23 months, each one between $8,000 and $9,900. The pattern is consistent with structuring, which, as I understand it, is a federal offense regardless of whether the underlying funds were obtained legally. The 2 detectives looked at each other. Detective Moreau closed his notebook. Detective Voss picked up her phone and stepped out of the room. When she returned 4 minutes later, she said, "Miss Williams, we are going to need you to stay a little longer. There are some people who want to see your file." "What people?" I said. "Federal agents," she said. "They are on their way from Columbia." I sat in that interview room for 3 more hours. 2 agents from the federal field office in Columbia arrived at 11:15. They were quiet, methodical, and they read every page of my file without speaking. When they finished, the senior agent, a woman named Special Agent Karen Liu, looked at me and said, "Miss Williams, how long did it take you to compile all of this?" 8 days, I said. She nodded slowly. "Most forensic teams take months," she said. "I have been doing this work for 40 years. I said, "I just never had a reason to do it against my own family before." Special Agent Liu closed the file. She looked at her partner. Then she looked back at me with an expression I had seen before but never directed at me, the expression of professional respect from one woman to another. "Miss Williams," she said, "I would recommend that you stay away from the bakery tomorrow morning. There will be activity on Main Street that you may not want to be present for." I understood what she meant. I nodded. Henry drove me home that afternoon. The sun was low over Charleston, painting the church steeples gold. I looked out the window at the city my father had loved, the city where he had turned flower and faith into something that mattered, and I said quietly, almost to myself, almost to him, "Daddy, I am almost finished." The next morning I woke at 4 o'clock without an alarm. My body has been waking at 4 o'clock for so long that it no longer requires permission. I lay in bed for a few minutes and listened to the house, the brass clock in the kitchen, the oak tree outside the window, the distant rumble of a freight train crossing the Ashley River Bridge. Normal sounds. The sounds of a Tuesday in Charleston. Except this Tuesday was not normal, because sometime today, federal agents were going to raid my family's bakery, and my brother was going to be arrested, and my mother was going to learn that the empire she had spent 60 years controlling was no longer hers to control. I got up. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, not to work this time, but simply to sit. The legal pads were stacked neatly against the wall. The laptops were closed. The tin box sat on the shelf where it had lived for 3 years, its lid slightly open now. My father's aftershave long since faded into the air. Everything that needed to be done had been done. The evidence was in federal hands. The trust documents were filed. The case was built. I had spent 40 years learning how to construct an airtight financial record, and in 8 days I had constructed one that would dismantle everything my brother had corrupted. There was nothing left to do but wait. Henry Porter called at 7:30. He said the warrants had been obtained overnight. He said the operation was scheduled for noon. He reminded me of what Special Agent Lou had said the day before, that it might be better if I was not inside the building. I told him I understood. I told him I would not go inside, but I would be on Main Street, standing on the sidewalk across from the building my father built, because I had earned the right to witness what happened next. Nicole called at 8. Her voice was steady but thin, the voice of a person holding herself together with effort. She said she had not slept. She said she had spent the night sitting on the floor of her apartment looking at photographs of her grandfather, pictures of the two of them in the bakery kitchen, flour on their aprons, smiling at each other over a tray of biscuits that were golden and perfect and made with real butter and real vanilla and real love. She asked me if she was doing the right thing. I told her the truth, which is that doing the right thing almost never feels right while you are doing it. It feels like breaking. The rightness comes later, sometimes much later, when the pieces settle and you can see the shape of what you built from the rubble. She asked if she could stand with me. I said yes. The morning passed slowly. I watered the plants on my porch. I ironed a blouse I did not need to iron. I reread the first page of my father's letter, just the opening paragraph, the one that began with "My dearest Dorothy." I folded it back along its creases and placed it in the tin box and closed the lid. Then I put on a clean pair of slacks and a pale blue blouse and my low-heeled black pumps, and I drove to Main Street. I parked 2 blocks away and walked. The October sun was high and warm, and the street was busy with the usual midday traffic. Tourists with cameras, college students on bicycles, mothers pushing strollers, the lunch crowd flowing in and out of restaurants and shops. Nobody knew what was about to happen. The world was going about its ordinary business while something extraordinary gathered just beyond the edge of visibility. Nicole was already there. She stood on the sidewalk across from the bakery, wearing jeans and a white blouse, her hair down, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked young and scared and determined all at once. I walked up beside her and stood close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. At 8 minutes before noon, the first black vehicle turned onto Main Street from the direction of Calhoun. It moved slowly, deliberately, the way a storm moves across flat land when it knows there is nothing in its path. A second followed, then a third, then 3 more. 6 federal vehicles in a row, their windows dark, their engines humming in unison, rolling down Main Street past the tourist shops and the palmetto trees and the historic markers until they stopped in front of the bakery that my father had built from nothing. The doors opened simultaneously. Agents stepped out in dark windbreakers with 3 yellow letters across the back that every person in America recognizes. They moved with the coordinated precision of people who have rehearsed this exact sequence dozens of times. 2 agents went to the front door. 2 went to the side entrance on the alley. 2 went to the back. A perimeter formed on the sidewalk. Pedestrians stopped. A woman holding a shopping bag put her hand over her mouth. A man on a bicycle nearly fell over trying to look. The front door of the bakery opened and the agents went inside. Nicole reached down and took my hand. Her fingers were cold. I held them tightly and did not let go. We stood there on that sidewalk in the noon sun and watched through the bakery's front windows as the life my brother had built on theft and lies and our mother's blind devotion came apart in real time. We could see agents moving between the display cases. We could see employees being escorted to the sidewalk, confused, frightened, some of them still wearing their aprons. We could see the flash of cameras as agents photographed the register, the office, the kitchen, and then the front door opened again, and Raymond walked out. He came out in handcuffs. His wrists were pinned behind his back, and a female agent walked on each side of him with one hand on his arm, guiding him forward the way you guide someone who has forgotten how to walk. His navy suit jacket was gone. His tie was loosened. His face was the color of raw dough, white and slack and shapeless, and his eyes moved across the sidewalk crowd with the frantic darting of an animal that has just realized the cage door is closed. They had arrested him at the register. I learned this later from the news reports. But somehow I already knew it, because I had watched through the window, and I had seen the agents lead him from behind the counter, the same counter where my father had stood on opening day in 1975, and handed the first customer a brown paper bag containing 2 buttermilk biscuits and a slice of pound cake. Samuel Williams had stood behind that register with flour on his hands and tears in his eyes because a dream that began in his mother's kitchen had finally become real. And now his son stood in the same spot with federal handcuffs on his wrists because he had turned that dream into a crime. Raymond saw me across the street, across the parked cars and the yellow police tape, and the growing crowd of onlookers. His eyes found mine the way they always had in moments of crisis. Because even now, even after everything, some part of my brother still expected me to fix it. I had seen that look 1,000 times. when the health inspector found violations he had ignored, when the bank called about a missed payment, when a vendor threatened to sue over an unpaid invoice. Raymond would appear in my doorway with that look, and I would put down whatever I was doing and make the problem disappear, because that is what invisible women do. They solve problems that visible men create. I did not look away. I did not smile. I did not nod. I simply stood on the sidewalk holding my niece's hand and let my brother see me clearly, perhaps for the first time in 58 years. Not as the sister who balanced the books, not as the daughter who stayed quiet, as the woman who had ended him. An agent opened the back door of a black federal vehicle. Raymond was guided inside. The door closed. The vehicle pulled away from the curb and turned the corner. And just like that, the chief executive officer of Williams Family Bakeries was gone from Main Street. Nicole's hand tightened around mine. I looked at her. She was crying silently, her jaw clenched, her shoulders rigid, tears running down both cheeks and dripping off her chin. She was watching the vehicle disappear and grieving something that could not be recovered. The version of her father she had believed in before she opened that unlocked desk drawer, before the hotel receipts and the contract, and the truth about her mother's lupus medication being paid for by a wife who fought her disease alone, while her husband chased other women through hotel lobbies. That version of Raymond was gone now, driven away in the same vehicle as the man in handcuffs, and Nicole would spend years learning that they had always been the same person. I did not tell her it would be all right. It would not be all right. Her father was going to prison. That is not a wound that heals with words. I simply held her hand and let her cry on a public sidewalk in front of God and Charleston and the noon sun, because sometimes the only thing you can offer someone is the willingness to stand beside them while their world burns down. Then the bakery door opened again, and my mother walked out. Constance emerged between two agents who were not touching her, but whose presence on either side left no ambiguity about the nature of her exit. She was not being arrested. She was being removed. The agents had determined that the bakery was now a federal crime scene, and every unauthorized person needed to leave. And Constance Williams, for all her pearls and posture and 88 years of commanding rooms, was an unauthorized person. She came through that door the way she had entered every room for as long as I had been alive. Chin raised, back straight, eyes forward. Her white St. John jacket was still buttoned. Her pearls were still in place. She held her purse in both hands in front of her body like a shield, and she walked across the sidewalk with the deliberate, measured stride of a woman who refuses to acknowledge that anything has gone wrong. But something had gone wrong, and every person on that street knew it. The crowd parted for her, not out of respect, but out of the awkward instinct people have when they encounter someone whose dignity is collapsing in public, and they do not want to be too close when it finishes falling. She saw me. She stopped. She stood on the sidewalk 15 feet away from me with the bakery behind her and the police tape between us and the noon sun casting her shadow, long and thin, across the pavement. She looked at me, and for the second time in my life I saw something move behind her eyes that was not control. The first time had been in her living room when I told her about the 47 photographs. This time it was larger. This time it filled her entire face for one unguarded moment before she pulled it back inside and locked it away. She did not speak. She turned and walked to a waiting car at the end of the block. A church friend, I assume, someone who had seen the commotion and come to collect her. The car door opened. Constance got in. The door closed, and the woman who had told me to know my place in front of 400 people was driven away from the building her husband built, removed by the same door she had once used to remove me. I stood on Main Street and watched the car disappear around the corner. Nicole leaned her head against my shoulder. The bakery's front window reflected the afternoon light, and behind the glass I could see the empty display cases and the silent kitchen and the old brick oven my father had built with his own hands. It was not over yet, but for the first time in 66 years, I was the one left standing. I will not tell you those months were easy, because that would be a lie, and I have spent too much of my life surrounded by lies to start telling them now. The federal investigation expanded in ways I had not anticipated. Agents interviewed 63 employees. They subpoenaed bank records from 4 states. They traced the Las Vegas lender to a network that the Bureau had been monitoring for 2 years in connection with money laundering operations stretching from Nevada to the Carolinas. And when they pulled that thread, the entire garment came apart. Raymond had not just borrowed from criminals. He had allowed them to wash money through the bakery's accounts. Small deposits routed through the catering division that looked legitimate on paper, but existed nowhere in reality. He may not have fully understood what he was facilitating. It did not matter. The law does not require understanding. It requires participation, and the records proved his. The trial lasted 9 days. I attended every session. I sat in the 3rd row of the federal courthouse in Columbia, the same row my mother had assigned me at my father's funeral, and I watched my brother's life be disassembled by prosecutors who used my spreadsheets as their foundation. Raymond's attorney argued that he was a businessman who had made mistakes, not a criminal. The jury disagreed. They deliberated for 6 hours and returned a verdict of guilty on 11 counts, including wire fraud, embezzlement, pension fund theft, structuring financial transactions to evade reporting requirements, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. Raymond stood when the sentence was read. His shoulders dropped forward as though someone had cut the strings holding him upright. He looked back at the gallery, searching for Constance, but she was not there. She had stopped coming after the 3rd day. Nicole sat beside me in that courtroom on the day of sentencing. She did not cry. She had done her crying months ago, on a sidewalk on Main Street, holding my hand while federal agents drove her father away in handcuffs. What she did instead was harder than crying. She sat perfectly still and watched the man who had taught her to ride a bicycle and who had lied to her every single day of her 28 years be led out of a courtroom in chains. Then she stood up, took my arm, and walked me to the car without saying a word. Some grief does not need language. It needs presence. Denise Crawford was terminated by Global Taste Corporation within 48 hours of the press conference. The company issued a statement saying they had been unaware of the internal disputes at Williams Family Bakeries and had relied on representations made by Raymond Williams and their senior vice president of acquisitions. Denise's name disappeared from their website by the following morning. I do not know where she went. I did not look. Constance lost the house on Trad Street. The federal seizure included all properties purchased or maintained with misappropriated company funds, and the mortgage payments had been drawn from the bakery operating account for 11 years. She moved into a small apartment near the medical university, paid for by her church. I heard she still attended Sunday services, still wore her pearls, still sat in the second pew. I heard she told the congregation that her family was being tested by the Lord and that she forgave those who had wronged her. She did not specify who had wronged whom. I bought the bakery at the federal auction. Henry Porter handled the legal work. The purchase price was $2.1 million. Funded by a small business loan co-signed by 3 Charleston investors who had read the red folder and decided that a woman who could build a case that thorough could certainly rebuild a bakery. I signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in Henry's office, and when I wrote my name on the line that said new owner, my hand did not shake. It had stopped shaking months ago. The first thing I did was restore the pension fund. I worked with a financial recovery specialist to establish a new retirement account for every current and former employee, funded initially from the sale of the Miami Beach condominium, which the court had ordered liquidated. The full $2.3 million was returned within 90 days. Martha Henderson came into my office the morning she received her first new statement. She sat down in the chair across from my desk and looked at the numbers and then looked at me and said, "Miss Dot, this is my beach house money. I thought it was gone forever." I told her it was never gone. It was just in the wrong hands. I rehired every employee Raymond had brought in and kept every employee my father had originally hired, with one condition. We were going back to the original recipes. No substitutions, no shortcuts. Real French butter, real Belgian chocolate, real Madagascar vanilla, real stone-ground heritage wheat from the mill in North Carolina. I recalculated the cost structure myself, sitting at a proper desk in a proper office with a window that looked out over Main Street. And I found that the increased ingredient costs reduced the profit margin by 11%, but increased customer satisfaction and repeat purchases by a margin that more than compensated within the first quarter. Nicole became head pastry chef. She brought her Le Cordon Bleu training and her grandfather's instincts and her 28-year-old energy into that kitchen, and she made it sing. She arrived every morning at 4 o'clock, the same hour her grandfather had arrived, the same hour I had arrived for 40 years. And she tied on her apron and turned on the ovens and began working the dough with hands that moved exactly the way Samuel's had, confident and gentle and precise, I arrived at 4 o'clock too, not because anyone required it, not because there were books to balance in the dark before anyone else woke up. I arrived at 4 because that is who I am. And for the first time in my life, I was arriving at 4 in the morning for myself, in my own bakery, to do work that carried my name. The batter came together the way my father described in his letter, the way his mother had taught him in a kitchen, with no running water on John's Island in a time when a black woman's genius was something the world refused to name. I measured each ingredient by hand: 2 cups of stone ground heritage wheat flour, 1 cup of real French butter, softened to room temperature, 6 eggs, cracked 1 at a time, pure Madagascar vanilla, 3 teaspoons, enough to fill the entire kitchen with a fragrance so deep and warm it felt like a memory taking physical form. I mixed it slowly, by hand, with a wooden spoon, because Hattie Mae Williams did not own a mixer and had never needed one. Her arms were the machine. Her instinct was the recipe. Her love was the heat. The oven reached 325 degrees at 4:37 in the morning. I poured the batter into the same bundt pan my father had used for his first batch in 1975. A heavy cast aluminum pan with a scratch on the left side, where he had dropped it during a Christmas rush in 1982. I placed it in the oven and closed the door and stood there with my hands folded in front of me, the way you stand in church when the choir begins to sing and the sound is too beautiful to interrupt with movement. The kitchen filled with smell, not just butter, not just vanilla, something older, something that carried in it the memory of a woman born in 1910 who could not write her own name but could make a pound cake that brought grown men to tears. I breathed it in and felt my father standing beside me, felt his hand on my shoulder, felt him saying, "That is it. Dot. That is her. That is your grandmother." At 5 o'clock, the back door opened and Martha Henderson walked in. She was wearing a cotton dress and her good shoes, which meant she had dressed up for the occasion, even though I had not told her anything was happening today. 50 years of working in this kitchen had given Martha a sixth sense about the bakery, the way old sailors have a sixth sense about weather. She knew something was different the moment she crossed the threshold. She stopped in the doorway. She lifted her chin and inhaled deeply. Her eyes closed. "Lord, have mercy," she whispered. "That is Samuel's pound cake. The real one," I smiled. "No, Martha," I said. "That is Hattie Mae's pound cake. It always was." Martha opened her eyes and looked at me, and then she looked at the oven, and then she sat down on the wooden stool near the prep station and put both hands over her heart and did not say another word, because some moments are too full for language. Nicole arrived at 5:15. She came through the back door, already wearing her apron, her hair tied back, her eyes bright with the particular energy of a young woman who has found her purpose and cannot wait to get her hands into it. She smelled the kitchen and stopped. She looked at me. She looked at Martha. She looked at the oven with the light glowing through the glass door and the pound cake rising inside it, golden and perfect. "Grandma Hattie Mae," she said softly. I nodded. The three of us stood in that kitchen together as the sun came up over Charleston. 3 women, 3 generations of connection to the bakery on Main Street. Martha, who had been here since the very first week. Me, who had kept the numbers alive for 40 years. And Nicole, who would carry the recipes forward into whatever came next. We did not speak much. We drank coffee. We watched the cake rise. And when the timer chimed and I pulled the pan from the oven and turned the cake out onto the cooling rack, the sound it made, that soft, heavy thud of a perfect pound cake releasing from its mold, was the most satisfying sound I had heard in 66 years of living. Martha tasted it first. She closed her eyes and chewed slowly, and then she said, "Miss Dot, that is exactly right. That tastes like 1975. That tastes like your daddy's hands," I said. "It tastes like his mama's hands." And Martha nodded because she understood. At 8 o'clock that morning, I walked out the front door of the bakery onto Main Street. Nicole and Martha followed. A small crew was already there, 2 men on a ladder waiting for my signal. I looked up at the old sign that had hung above the store for 50 years. Williams Family Bakeries. My father's name, my brother's inheritance, my mother's kingdom. I nodded. They took it down carefully. They placed the new sign on the brackets and bolted it into place and stepped away. I looked up and read the words that I had chosen 6 months ago, the words that had lived inside my father's letter, inside his guilt, inside his final wish. Hattie Mae's, established 1975, 3 generations of love, flour, and faith. Nicole took my right hand. Martha took my left. We stood on the sidewalk and looked up at that sign, and I cried, not from sadness, not from relief, from completion. My grandmother, who was born in a shotgun house with no running water, who could not read or write, who created every recipe that built this empire with nothing but her hands, and her God-given instinct, finally had her name on the door. A woman walking past stopped and read the sign. She smiled and walked inside. A couple behind her did the same. Then a man with a newspaper, then a mother with 2 children, one by one. The people of Charleston walked through the door beneath my grandmother's name and smelled the butter and the vanilla and the flour and the faith, and they sat down, and they were home. I stood on that sidewalk in the morning sun, 66 years old, holding the hands of the women who had walked this road with me. And I understood something my father had tried to tell me in his letter. You are never too late to reclaim what was always yours. You are never too old to stand up. And the quietest woman in the room is very often the most dangerous one in it, because she has been listening and learning and waiting. And when she finally moves, she does not miss. My name is Dorothy Williams. This is my grandmother's bakery, and we are open.